a lot of the rest of the world is actually starting to experience a little bit of what we do being on that cutting edge because everyone is trying to adopt AI, right? Whereas education would have always been the first one to sort of adopt that new technology and bring it into the education world, whether to improve learning outcomes or research outcomes. We want to have that edge, I guess, against everyone else. So as the world now quickly tries to adopt Gen AI into whatever potential project they can think of, they're really starting to see that cutting edge can be tricky. And we're seeing some companies have a lot of failure with those Gen AI initiatives and have to roll back and pull back, while others are, you know, making layoffs right out of the gate, thinking AI is going to solve all their problems and not having a real plan there. So it's very interesting seeing everyone else kind of struggle with that in a space that AI, that higher ed has been in and struggled ourselves through for the last several decades.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the CyberPro Podcast, where industry leaders share their insights because hackers never sleep. Today, we're working with Zach Lewis. Zach, easiest question of the day. Who are you and why are you awesome?
Sure. So I am the CIO and CISO for the University of Health Sciences and Pharmacy. I've been there about 10 years and just been in the higher ed industry for a long time. And that's kind of where I've made my, I guess, career at thus far.
I love it. I love it. So we'd like to start with kind of a macro question, just kind of get us rolling, get us talking about stuff, some fun stuff there. What do you feel is the most critical aspect of a robust cybersecurity strategy?
A robust, I think having just a plan in general, like a framework to follow. You got to have goals to shoot for. You got to have objectives you want to complete. You're just shooting off in the dark, doing whatever pops into your head. You're not going to make any real progress. So a nice laid out plan. It can be very basic. You can grow on it. It can change as the company changes, but just having something to shoot for and move towards, I think, is important.
I love it. Do you have any frameworks that you prefer to use?
We've been a CIS critical control shop for probably 4 or 5 years now. It just really worked for our environment. There's implementation stages. So after we finished implementation phase 1, we moved to 2, and now we're partway between 2 and 3, and that's probably where we'll end up staying for a little while.
I love it. I love it. So I'm going to dig right in. You're an author. We'll get into the technical weeds shortly, but you're an author. Your book Locked Up came out or is about to come out, I
Wow,
think in
yeah.
January. I'd love for you to highlight what you're putting out in the world next year once it's released.
Yeah, so Locked Up is a story of a ransomware incident that the university and I kind of worked through. And one of the first the university had to deal with, I sort of detail everything that goes on pre breach, post, and then everything in between, all the decisions that were made, some of the hiccups that happened, roadblocks we ran into, and stuff like that. I found that after that incident, I started talking about it a little bit more at conferences, doing a presentation here and there, and people had a lot of questions. People wanted to know more, and it seemed like there was a little bit of a hunger out there, a little bit of an appetite, rather. And so I threw it into a book, made a pitch to a publisher. They loved it, and we're going to put it out. And I'm hoping it kind of gives a framework, help, guidance to people going through the same sort of thing that we did, just because it's very common. Everyone's have it happening, and I don't know, ransomware breaches have sort of the stigma in the industry where people don't always want to talk about it, and whether there's legal reasons or something else to keep it quiet. I'm trying to lessen that a little bit and give a helping hand, I guess, when I can.
I love it. I myself am an author. I'm finishing my PhD dissertation, so I
Nice.
know how much time goes into it. So I appreciate you leaning in on that. Zach, you wear both hats. I know you're the CISO, the CIO. You've kind of done both sides of that house. And I know they're aligned. They're strategically aligned in most situations, not all. But what's the hardest trade-off that you've had to make between, the CIO, innovation, information, that type of stuff, and security?
Time. Find the time for it all. I mean, really. When you're wearing both hats, you have IT responsibilities for the organization, projects and departments that got to move forward on how we're able to operate. But from the security side point and the CISO, you want to secure that stuff, make things, getting patched and upgraded and being used securely. Where's our data going? Who's accessing it? And you got to find time for all that and allocate team members appropriately in budget. At least I don't have to fight with another chief officer for budget. It's all sort of in my pot, but allocating it is now my responsibility and making sure that that's properly done. So there are trade-offs. There's pros and cons. Some days I wear one hat more than the other. Some weeks I feel like I wear one hat more than the other, but I don't know. I've come to have a real appreciation for both roles. I could see myself going down either path eventually in the future, but I know in the university setting that I'm in, it makes sense. It works there, and it definitely wouldn't work in every instance in every company that you would find.
To break it down a little bit even more, what are the key differences so people can understand as they're going after their career journey or looking at it from a board perspective and are about to hire one or the other? What are the differences between a CIO and a CISO?
Sure. So when I think of CIO, I think of digital transformation. I think of the person bringing in the technology to the departments, the technology to the organization that helps them generate revenue, create products, supply their customers, clients, students in our case, whatever that might be. And they can be a generator of revenue in and of themselves. They can keep the latest technology to innovate in the company and keep them going. On the CISO side, we're going to protect those pieces of software. We're not going to generate revenue. We're going to maybe protect revenue loss potentially, but we're not a cost generator ourselves. So we're going to look at those technologies that are put in and make sure that they're put in securely, that the company can use them without damaging reputation or losing data or proprietary information. And we're going to try to keep the bad guys out.
Love that. I love it. Let's focus a little bit on higher education. What do you think really moves the needle and is really important when it comes to building that resilient framework in the higher education component? We're going to lead this into the next question, and I'll seed it for you right now. And that's, what's the difference between higher education and the rest of the world when it comes to this resilient thought process?
Sure. So at our university, we're a health sciences university and pharmacy. So we have healthcare information, we have student information, we have research information. So we're kind of dipping into all the different pots that we have. We have restaurants too, so you can get into PCI, all these different compliance frameworks, all this different kinds of data, and we come to a culture of academic freedom. Where that's kind of where document and data and information sharing got its start, where faculty would want to share information, have access to real information in real time, and pass that back and forth. And we've come a long way since then, where now we need to secure that and look to who's accessing it, when, and why. So you have to balance that academic freedom that faculty are really, really used to and really, really want in terms of research and educating, but also make sure we're not losing customer data and employee data and different things like that. So it becomes a real balancing act, I think, in terms of that. So for our resilience piece, for us, we've actually moved to a very cloud first, SaaS first sort of environment. This is the IT side of the house, moving everything that way. And the thought process there is, hey, we want people to have that access to data in real time from kind of wherever they are. They might be working from home, they might be teaching abroad, wherever that might be. So if we can SaaS it, we can cloud it, they can get to it from any application. And we're doing, and then on the security side, how do we do that securely? So we've put in some tools in place to kind of make sure that that's accessible securely from anywhere in the world, and try to put the fewest amount of roadblocks in between faculty and students to get to that and do that, but that ensures sort of security. That's kind of a very broad answer, but that's sort of the mindset behind it.
Love it. And so then I'll lead into that other seeded question with this kind of response component. I feel that in higher education, because of always having to adapt and digitally transform for the next generation of students, you guys are always kind of on that edge of cutting edge technology, finding the best customer experience. But that also means that you're on the cutting edge of what the hell do I do with my security stack? And I think that's uniquely different than most commercial or enterprise businesses. And so what are some of the big differences between higher education resilience and resilience in the rest of the world?
Yeah. I think a lot of the rest of the world is actually starting to experience a little bit of what we do being on that cutting edge, because everyone is trying to adopt AI, right? Whereas education would have always been the first one to sort of adopt that new technology and bring it into the education world, whether to improve learning outcomes or research outcomes. We want to have that edge, I guess, against everyone else. So as the world now quickly tries to adopt Gen AI into whatever potential project they can think of, they're really starting to see that cutting edge can be tricky. And we're seeing some companies have a lot of failure with those Gen AI initiatives and have to roll back and pull back, while others are, you know, making layoffs right out of the gate, thinking AI is going to solve all their problems and not having a real plan there. So it's very interesting seeing everyone else kind of struggle with that in a space that that higher ed has been in and struggled ourselves through for the last several decades. That's probably the biggest one is just bringing in that new tech and figuring out where it makes sense. Not just doing a project or bringing something in just to do it, but actually having that. This goes back to the first question, having that plan of how to implement it and why we're doing it and what sort of benefits we're going to have from that.
We're going to hang on to the artificial intelligence piece, especially because you talked about the plan. I stand on a pulpit often when I'm asked to consult for customers, and they ask me, our employees are using AI. We have to have an answer to this. We know that our competitors are using artificial intelligence, and we have to have an answer for this. And I tell them, take a breath. The last report I saw from RSA and from Verizon was that 88% of you guys are failing when you go and try to implement an AI solution. So what's the problem with that? What's the issue with that, right? And well, I usually stand on that pulpit and talk about you haven't looked at your systems, you haven't looked at your business intelligence, you haven't looked at your data, and you haven't realized that most of what you need is just machine learning, which has been around for years
Hmm.
before you lean into the agentic AI and the Gen AI. So this is where I'm going with this question then is, how are you utilizing artificial intelligence from the digital transformation side, the CIO component, as well as from the security side, your CISO side?
Yeah. For the security side, we've been using AI, machine learning for years, right? I think one of the best implementations of it for us was when we adopted a newer AI email platform. Getting away from the old SEGs, bringing in a newer sort of AI detection tool that reads through these emails, sees the contents, the context. Have you been emailed before? All these different identifiers, hundreds of them in seconds, and then can just block these emails from happening. We used to have an old email security email gateway, a SEG, and we were getting 4 or 5 phishing emails a week. It was a little ridiculous trying to scrub those out, people clicking on stuff. And when we moved to an AI enabled one, they went away. Right, like that's the best use case, and I like to think that we're kind of entering a stage of technology where people used to say, there's not a piece of technology for a human problem. Sometimes you got to train the humans. Well, we're starting to get to that point where there are a few more technology fixes for some of those things. And AI and email, I think, is a great use case. So that's one that kind of comes to mind. But on the other side of the house, so I'm also running the sort of the AI work group, AI committee on use cases at the university, trying to see what is there. So I took 15, 20 of our, we'll call them top performers from different departments, and we paired them up with AI agents or generative AI tools, and just kind of sent them off, give them a little training, talk about different use cases we've seen out in the wild, and try to have them develop use cases. Are you seeing savings in your time here, in your effort put in? Is there benefit? Talked to marketing, we talked to faculty, we talked to HR, legal, and different teams, and we were meeting every couple of weeks discussing those. And some of those places, some of those departments, we actually saw some pretty big savings. HR loved it, legal loved it. Some of the faculty not so much. And we're still like, yeah, kind of developing through that and figuring out what makes sense, but not going full scale and like licensing everyone by building all these tools out and letting it go wild. Sometimes it's just a Microsoft Copilot or a Chat GPT, and other times it might be some other tool. Like my developers, I partnered with a tool called Replit to help them with app development, and they've loved it. Right, it's great. Could they have done it on their own? Sure, but can they do it in 1/10 the time now? Absolutely, which is awesome.
Right. I love it. I love it. So I want to pivot over and talk about cyber risk and budgets because you are the dual hat C suite. You have to beg for budget all the time. And you also are in an interesting situation because you're having a lot of conversations around budget with board of directors, with provost, with your deans, and it's a different conversation. And I think it would be fascinating and helpful for those other C suites who are asking for budget as they align cyber risk to non-technical buyers. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So what I did several years back was start partnering very closely with enterprise risk. And I want to be upfront and say I don't think anyone does enterprise risk well, right? It's never done well anywhere. It's very hard to do. There's always a moving needle, and every company is a little bit different. But what we did was went to enterprise risk, sort of made the pitch that, hey, security we have our own risks, our own way we measure stuff and track stuff, but I also want to track it inside of the overall enterprise risk. And then we're going to tie that risk to budget. I became a committee member for the enterprise risk committee, eventually chaired it, and we wanted to tie those risks to budget numbers. So when we come and present to the board, it's like, here's our top risks, here's some of our mitigation plans, and here's the budget we're going to need to knock those off. We have these projects that have to happen to achieve business goals, but if we wanted to diminish the risks in these areas, we're going to need these sorts of funds to do that. And when you have cyber risks in there, and whether that's from potential of data exfiltration and losing out on some new research patent or something, like, we want to make sure we're protecting that. So we kind of give some numbers of what that looks like, where we're seeing it in other education institutions, and usually make the pitch. I'm not doing a lot of math. I'm not doing a bunch of Monte Carlo simulations or doing the fair risk methodology. Just the board at the end of the day probably doesn't care that much. At least mine doesn't. So we try to keep it very high level, come to them with a couple different solutions. Hey, if we do this, it's going to cost X amount. If we do B, it's going to cost Y amount. What do you want to do? Do you not want to do anything? And if they, usually lean into a solution, one or the other, and then we execute. And that's all I need. I just need that green light. And then we go and we execute, make sure we execute it well. I try very hard not to go over budget, try to get done above time. Any project that the team works on with any department, we try to get done the same way and make it successful. So when the board or the leadership look back and they go, man, why'd that project go so well? Oh, hey, IT was on it, or security was on it. And when they look at the ones that didn't go well, we don't want to be there. So they know that if they want something to be executed properly, they're going to put us on it. So anytime, a project comes to mind, they think, oh, hey, we need IT on that. So it gets done right. And that's usually, if you can execute that way, you kind of get the budget you need when you ask for it, because you're not just asking for money to ask for money every time.
Let's just dig in just real quick on that. Fairly quick response on that one. You mentioned it. Some boards will look at that and go, we don't see the value. We're going to accept the fact that we are going to either attempt to avoid or just accept that that risk is there and kind of hope. How do you respond to that? And what do you have to keep in the back of your mind when somebody says, we're not gonna layer a risk approach on this. We're just gonna
Yeah.
hope.
Yeah. I think that's where a lot of CISOs feel the stress, or maybe where some of that burnout comes from, because maybe they think they're not being taken seriously, or something like that. But at the end of the day, it's, this is a business decision. Businesses, leadership boards understand numbers, money, revenue. That's what they care about, and they don't see this as a real threat. And then maybe it's because you didn't present it well, but I think for the most part they have a good understanding of where they want to go. If they want to accept that, then hey, you've heard it. It's recorded in the minutes. Move on. Like, you did your pitch. If something changes down the road and that risk becomes more severe, you document that, you run that back up the poll to who it matters to, and see if that policy changes. But if it doesn't, you've done your work, you've performed your due diligence. It's time to move on to other things.
And that's the I told you so moment without saying I told you so.
That is. If it does happen, you come back to, oh, how'd this happen? Well, we talked about it and you guys were good with it. But they have to understand that, they're the board, they're the leadership of that. That is their responsibility. That's not my responsibility or another CISO's responsibility to do that. We have to move on. There's other things that we have to finish and other projects we have to complete.
I'm excited for this next question because you guys have to focus on two different types of users at the higher education. You have to focus on your staff, right? Which most companies are used to. They focus on that user base, that employee count. But you have to focus on all of those students who are still accessing some data in some form. So, how do you reduce the friction when it comes to the different users without weakening your controls?
Yeah. So the students, and there, a couple different things with students. So for a long time, we did a one-to-one laptop program for them. So they actually got a machine from us that we would manage, repair, secure, do all that stuff. And actually, there was a big push to move away from that. So a few years back, we actually moved away and we went to BYOD for them, which sort of changed things in our environment, because now we don't have those secure managed devices anymore hitting the network. We have tons of BYOD devices. So we actually looked at sort of segmenting the network in a way where they go directly to the internet. They can't communicate across the network to any devices, not over Wi-Fi. They can't discover anybody. They can't do any of that. It's just them, internet. That's it. That's what you get. And that kind of at least secured the back end environment. I mentioned how we were a very SaaS first, cloud first university. So again, we moved all of our platforms to the cloud. So when they're getting into learning management systems to do their courses, to submit homework assignments, cloud based, they can do that anywhere in the world. If they would need to access data, some OneDrive, SharePoint, you log in, boom, you can grab it and pull that down. We try to make it, and all of our applications across the board, we've tried to implement single sign-on behind the Microsoft point. So with Intra, one ID, one login, MFA enabled. You can get to all your different applications from that single checkpoint. We've made it as easy as possible for them to get there while trying to keep as much security on the back end that we think is appropriate for students. Now, they're not touching the most sensitive critical data, so we can be a little bit more lax with them as opposed to faculty or staff, but we still want to give them some protection so they're not clicking on every phishing email that comes through or downloading malicious links, scanning QR codes, that sort of thing. But we can give them a little bit more flexibility there.
Let's dig into the burnout questions, right? 30 seconds or less. What's the number one mistakes universities make when they're preparing for ransomware?
I think more universities should run tabletops against their plans. I don't think they do enough, and even when you do, you're going to find some gotchas, but do more tabletops and practice that.
Why are tabletops so important?
You get to figure out who's in charge of what and how communication's going to flow, who's going to make certain decisions, who needs to be brought in. Do you need to get dean of students to let students know? When are you going to let them know? When are you going to let the public know? There's a lot of communication pieces there, and everyone thinks the CISO is going to make that decision, and it's not going to be the CISO. It's going to be the other executive leaders.
I love it. All right. Zero trust in a couple of sentences. What is it? Why is it important? And are you guys thinking about using it on campus?
I think there are parts to zero trust we really like. We do a lot of verification of identification before people can get to certain assets. We don't trust. We always verify. I think it's important. I think it's a journey that never ends, and it's hard to really put your finger on it. But there's a lot of, there's a lot of factors into it, And you talk about technologies. We have MFA. But we want ease of use. We want that single sign-on piece. So just trying to trust users to have good strong passwords, do best security practices, and verify as much as we can. That's a weird answer, but I'm going to go with it.
I love it. I love it. So knowing that you're writing the book, knowing that you're unfortunately have seen the encryption side of an incident, post an incident, 30 days after an incident, you have your recovery checklist. What are the first 3 steps that you want to make sure that you hit and that you're going to hit in the future?
Well, if you figure out why you got breached, don't let that happen again. Don't let that be the same way you get breached again in the future. That's probably the most important. That's number one, right? You're going to want to have a good write-up and maybe some sources either from insurance or like CISA or somebody to come in and just give a pitch to the board at the next presentation. I think that's always good because they want updates. So that's what I try to do. Try to bring in, hey, we've closed these gaps. Hey, we did these things. We think we're in a good position right now. Just kind of reassure them that we've closed up, and then number 3, ask for money. It's a great time to ask for money, right there.
Love it.
I think everyone should go through. I don't want you to, but anybody going through a breach and coming out of it on the other side is good for you. It's great experience. A little trial by fire. You learn to appreciate a lot more stuff.
I love the honesty there too. So that's amazing. All right. Top 3 controls that make the most ROI when it comes to building cyber resilience.
A very good email security platform. Stop those phishing emails. That's the number one way people get compromised. Multi-factor authentication. It's like a no-brainer. Duh. And number 3, what could be number 3? Again, pick a framework, run through it.
I love it. All proactive. I'm curious if you just forgot it. What about disaster recovery and backups?
I write about it a lot in the book, and you'll see it. I think backups are your best bet against at least recovering from ransomware. You should absolutely do it. Disaster recovery plan. I talk a lot about that in the book. Disaster recovery plans, incident recovery plans, response plans. Have them, practice them, test them, update them. Set a reminder and update them a couple times a year when anything changes. Like, make sure they're up to date and that you can get to them in the event of a breach. Don't leave them hanging out in space, encrypted somewhere.
Yeah, that's the worst. All right, take a breath, take some time. But what is the coolest thing that has happened to you in your career in cybersecurity?
Getting the chief title, man. Like, that's
I
so dope. Like, you set goals and you finally get there, which is great. I, for a long time wanted to be a CIO, and when you finally get to sit in that seat, it's like, man, I've made it. That's all right.
All right. So besides that, why do you love being a cyber professional, and why should someone else become a cyber pro?
I like the protection's a weird word. I like the security of it. I like it's it's like a gamification. It's like a game. Can you beat the bad guys? You want to build a system that's robust that can handle, getting attacked. You build that resilience. It's almost like a tower defense game from back in the day where I'm trying to build up these defenses to keep the bad guys out that are storming the gates, protecting my friends and coworkers and everything that we've kind of built. This is your baby. You want to make sure it's safe and secure. And I don't know, it's like a thrill to it that I think is really fun. Should you get into it? I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, it's good, right? It depends on your mindset. You gotta have the right mindset for it. It can be stressful at times. We've seen burnout in the industry, so I think it's more than just passion. I mean, there's a real interest there. You got to be able to have fun with it. You can't take yourself too seriously, and you just kind of, rock and roll, man.
I love it. Zach, epic having you on the CyberPro podcast.
Rick, it's been awesome, dude. I'm glad we could do this.